This is the February 12th meeting of the Coast Division. It's a virtual event with a discussion of future events as well as some local modeling. Welcome, everyone. So I didn't have anything formal for today. David's been putting some stuff together for clinics. If anyone has anything and is interested, send David an email. You can put his link in the chat, and
Please do.
And then we can go from there. So just the only announcement I have today, quite frankly, is that on the 20th, we have planned for May 22nd to do the auction. That's a Sunday at the Elks.
May 22nd.
There were two dates in May that we could choose, May 8th and May 22nd. Personally, I would have preferred May 8th. However, when I went and looked in my calendar at May 8th, at the top of the day, it was Mother's Day. And I just didn't think it was appropriate to schedule the auction on Mother's Day, even though someone sent me an email saying we don't have very many mothers around, but I felt it became too much of a conflict. And so we chose the 22nd. The downside of the 22nd is it starts moving back into graduation season. That was kind of why I like the 8th better. But it is a Sunday, and as far as I know, nobody does those kind of things on Sundays. So we'll be at the Elks. The cost has gone up a bit from where we were last year, but I think it's still very doable for this auction. The other impact of that is we're going to move the idea of a South Bay event to September to grandmother's count. Yeah, I think they do. I think that's the problem with doing it on Mother's Day is that everybody has some form of mother somewhere. And so it just impacts that. Too many people get impacted. So what that means is we're going to move the South Bay event to do that in September. Quite frankly, I think this is almost, there's a silver lining to this. And the fact I just didn't feel at all comfortable, and the group didn't feel comfortable with the auction in March, just because looking at the numbers, it looked like 60 to 70% of the people who could come wouldn't come, or had serious doubts about coming. And so I think by May we'll be in good shape for that. What that means, though, is we have to move the South Bay event probably to September. I don't think we want to try to do two events back to back within a month. The silver lining to that is that long term, I think the right alignment for us is to do our auctions in the summer and right before Christmas. So basically December for auctions. And that puts our get-together events in more climate weather. Typically it gets warmer in the summer and we get rain in more in the winter areas. So in terms of alignment, I think this is probably a good idea. We're trying to see if we can do some sort of a more what I call a field trip type of event in March, but I don't have a date yet. So as soon as we get that, I will distribute that and communicate it. Hopefully we'll get at least 4 weeks notice for that, but it'll be something where hopefully we'll have a couple of things as activities to do together as a group. So, and that's about it.
At the risk of sounding like a brown noser, Phil, I'm happy simply because it's obvious that you took the time to consult with the various stakeholders, as they say in corporate speak. So everybody got a chance to say and be heard. And then, you and the other folks can say, okay, this is what we're going to do. So that all is fine for me. And then personally, with the pandemic and stuff, having things push out a little bit just makes me feel more comfortable. So I think that's great.
The other thing that I realized was that we were going to put, especially our volunteers, in potentially a conflict situation where they felt like they needed to come and volunteer, but they might be uncomfortable still with being in that kind of a close environment with other people for 5 hours. And I just didn't want to go to our volunteers and say, hey, we really want you to volunteer for this if they were uncomfortable. So moving it to me, I think makes that all a lot easier too. So that's kind of the plan right now. Hopefully in the next week or so, we'll close on some of these other things, something else to do. But I really wish we could have done it, but I just didn't think it's not fair to the buyers or the sellers or the members to have an event where we only have 30 or 40% of the people that could come, because it won't be a good event, and it financially would be potentially not good for the coast, because clearly our our capability to cover the costs of the auction location, and that is totally dependent upon the volume at the auction. So that was also a concern. So good. No, we're in good shape. How's everyone else doing? So I'm going to just throw it open for everyone to talk about. I'll kick off. I showed David this. So last night I was in the out at the club in Pleasanton, and we were getting ready to leave and walked over one of the narrow gauge guys. He says, "Oh, I got to put the throttle back together," because he had a throttle that was it's a manufactured throttle by a company, and they used a Bakelite case. And somebody dropped it on the floor and it broke 15 years ago, and it's been repeatedly taped. And I looked at that and said, "Well, you could 3D print that." So that was 20 minutes on the computer last night and 8 hours of printing. We now have a new case. So it's kind of interesting, this stuff. You can make all the other pieces for your railroad fairly quickly. So that was my little quick project. That's actually just since last night. So.
It's amazing. Once you get a 3D printer, you can print just about anything.
Yeah, well, you know what's really amazing is that this plastic is not nearly as strong as the plastic you get out of the 3D printer today. This plastic is better, better flexibility and braking characteristics. And I'd be willing to make a bet if you drop this the same way on the concrete, worst case it would dent a corner or something, but it wouldn't crack.
Exactly.
Considering when Bakelite was developed, one would hope that material science would have made some improvements in the subsequent 180 years.
But it's very interesting. So
yeah, now that I've got my 3D printer, I'm just finding little uses here and there for things that just make the modeling so much easier. Not to replace it, but just to make things that are hard to make. If you're cutting the pieces out.
Oh, absolutely. It's and even just making like tools and tool holders, et cetera, becomes fairly easy. So yeah, in fact, I talked to Frank, and he's doing a woodworking clinic up at the PCR, and he asked me, and so everybody who does the woodworking clinic will get one of those wood grain tools with the 7 X-Acto knives. We've made enough of them for hopefully everybody who takes the clinic. So. Something else you can do that's different. So David, are you going to show us you should show us your engine that you've completed at some point. So
I want to hold on that. I need to do some work before I do something. The engine is done, but I wanted actually to say something to Seth Newman. Seth, I want to thank you so much for whatever part you played in putting together the LD SIG meeting. It was really interesting to listen and learn and get how shall I put it, a better idea of the thorny questions around 2-deck layouts and how to connect the 2 decks. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. A bunch of folks, most of the usual suspects participated, and don't want to go through the whole thing now. We did have a slide up, but I'm really glad you appreciated that, and I'm so pleased we were able to do it in a hybrid format, and a few challenges, but I think generally came off pretty well, and just pleased that people enjoyed it.
Yeah, I want to say that, Seth. I thought the hybrid part was excellent. And so now we kind of know how to do it. I mean, even the rest of us who might have to do some sort of hybrid thing, I saw how it could be done, and I was really pleased.
Yeah, one side comment that it was done with an awful lot of equipment. And one of the things we're going to have to try to figure out is how to do it without as much equipment.
Actually, Phil, I'd like to talk to you about that offline at some point.
But I want to show you guys something that we found that is actually really interesting, good news. Actually, let me turn on screen sharing for everyone because I didn't turn it on yet. But let me share. I'm going to share something. This is actually a feature of Zoom. You can share content from a second camera. This is just a webcam. So that's a webcam. It's a 7-year-old Microsoft HD webcam, one of the ones that came out with, here, let me flip so you can see it. It's right here, and it's on this little tripod. And because you're sharing the camera and the share, it's sharing at 1920 by 1080. And I mean, I think the resolution on this stuff is really pretty good. Let me put this ruler under here because actually the ruler is probably most amazing of the resolution you get. So, you know, what this kind of says, and this is why I would talk a little with Earl about what he was doing, is if you don't feed it into the video feed that's us, because this video is limited, and in most Zooms it's limited to like 360, but you don't get, you know, 1080. By doing it this way, you can have yourself on video and be sharing something and have high resolution and be able to work on it. So it's pretty, I think it's going to be pretty interesting to think about September doing that. One of the questions that I wanted to ask folks was, when we do something that's hybrid, is it better to do it as a single event synchronously, or should we think about doing it asynchronously? In other words, you know, maybe do something where we do the sessions and then we repeat them virtually later or something like that. And it's kind of the interesting question is, do we try to do it all at one time? Because if you think about our events, if we have clinics in the morning, we have kind of a lunch, and we have layout tours in the afternoon, anybody who's hybrid can only participate in the clinics. And would it be better to have the clinics done twice, kind of, and maybe we record or something, how that gets done, so they're at different times. So for example, you know, if we have a physical meet on a Saturday, maybe a week later, we have the virtual version of the meet. And the idea is that way you can really focus on both ones. The physical one's purely physical, but you do the same content that fits. So that would be an option versus trying to do it physically at the same time. So anyway, just anyone's thoughts on those kind of things would be very interesting. We have about a year to figure it out.
Yeah, I'm just coming to the point that I really enjoy the virtual events so much more than I ever did the physical.
Well, and that's why in some ways, my, you know, maybe it makes more sense to try to do it virtually separate from the physical, but do both so we get both audiences. Anyway, but that's something we're going to work on. You know, I don't know what much is going to happen for the PCR this year, but definitely for what we're going to do in September, I think we need to think it through. And like I said, pretty comfortable now with this idea that, you know, we could, for example, if we do this at the South Bay Historical Society, we could set up in the back room where there's a smaller set of people for a hands-on demo using a camera, you know, like I just showed. And then in the other room, we could do more presentations that are content or informational, because there really are kind of two kinds of clinics. There's kind of the presenting slides and pictures and discussions and that. And then there's the other side where you actually have a physical demonstration. And so we had two different setups. We kind of have two types of clinics and separate them that way. So we'll spend some time. By the way, if anyone's interested in working on that and getting started on it, you know, give me a buzz and we'll get started. So
there seems to be a trade-off in that there's the immediacy where those of us that might be in the virtual part of a gathering, still have some sense of immediacy that we are still part of the whole audience rather than being segregated off.
Yep.
But I think is part of the driver for this is doing it where the virtual and the live are combined, that it's more expensive and or difficult to do?
Yeah, it's a combination of it's more difficult. It's also more difficult potentially to make it for the folks there. You know, how do you kind of combine the two? Do you do the clinic goes on afterwards? And it was just a thought. And like I said, you know, one of the things that's just thrown as a thought process to say, you know, if we had if we're going to have a virtual event, for example, if we have a clinic event on a Saturday, and we have a virtual event scheduled for the next Saturday, do we say we're going to take these three clinics from the virtual event and do them, or from the physical event and do them in the virtual event the next Saturday? And then, you know, the difference is if the clinician is in the room, they're kind of focused on the people in the room, and the people that are outside are just watching. If you take the same demonstration and do it, like I said, showed with a camera, where you're interacting with the people virtually, it's going to be a different experience. And I'm not 100% sure with the kind of things we do, especially when you get into a physical demo, that you don't have kind of a slightly lesser experience for both audiences when you do them together at the same time. And it's just kind of a little bit in the back of my head. I don't know, Seth, your thoughts too would be very interesting on this as we get into it. So, but yeah, like I said, it's something to think about how we do it. I love the idea of doing a hybrid virtual thing at the same time, as long as we can make sure that the experience for both groups is really good and it doesn't become so complicated that it's terribly onerous on our volunteers.
Break.
So anyway, enough said. We've got 7
Phil?
months. So.
Phil, the thing is here is there's another part of the equation to consider here. You have the audience, you have the people putting together the presentation devices and the cameras and stuff, but you also need to ask the presenters if they want to do it all in one shot or whether they want to do it twice, if you will. That's the
Right.
other leg of the stool to check.
Yep. No, exactly. So anyway, it's kind of one of those thought processes of, what's best for doing these. Right now, I think the thought process is to try to do it hybrid. And, what we can do is we can do a Zoom meeting like this, and we can have 2 breakout rooms, and each breakout room can be a clinic space. And one can be, like I said, kind of the information clinics that are, slide presentation discussions. The other can be a physical demonstration clinic, and we can run both of those at the same time for the virtual groups. So.
Yeah, I think at one extreme, you have people who like the live events, but when you really distill it down, it's more for the schmoozing. In terms of the actual presentation of information, and I may be a little bit out on the corner here, but I think, particularly for the hands-on clinics, just like you said, Phil, and I mean, there are, the technology's continually improving and coming down in price. You can deliver the information much better virtually, because everybody's, sitting in a comfortable place in front of an optimized screen, and you can really see what's going on. There's no bad seats in the house. And the fact that everybody's online, there's no distinction between the audience and the folks that we're monitoring on the stream. I mean, I think we tried hard. I don't know how well we did in getting the remote questions in on Sunday, but it's not even an issue when you do it in a straight virtual. But then I've mentioned to some of my NMRA colleagues, well, frankly, I think in terms of clinics, there's just no question that virtual is absolutely better. And, you'll get the more, modern thinking folks, in violent agreement. And you get a lot of people who just, viscerally disagree with that. Because to them, the whole point of the convention is, hanging out and talking to people, hopefully lubricated with your favorite adult beverage. And, so there's very, very different objectives in different groups. And that's one of the things we'll need to work forward. And I sent you a little message in the sidebar. So we should talk sometime later. And but these are really good questions. The good news is there's great ideas. We've tried a bunch of things. We have, wonderfully been able to reconnect with a lot of people who weren't able to participate in person. So these are some great things we want to carry forward. Anyway,
I think there's another, Seth, actually, you make another really good point, which is, if we do a clinic that's a hands-on clinic and we set up whatever we do with a camera so it can be presented virtually, it becomes really easy to grab a monitor from somewhere and put that up in the room. And so the people in the room now get a better view as well. So that's actually one of the good reasons for doing this together, especially on the hands-on stuff, is potentially giving a better view for folks in the room. Because typically, the view you get when you're 4 feet away looking at somebody doing something on a table is going to be different than a camera that's a foot above the table.
Oh,
But
yeah.
in the
And
room-
Earl and Rick Brennan were working on that like the 2 years before the pandemic started, and actually came out with some, I thought very effective and fairly easy to deploy solutions to that. So, I mean, we absolutely don't want to lose that in the live meets.
No, exactly. And I think the thing that was interesting and what, for what Earl did was actually based on where this stuff, the Zoom guys were 2 years ago. This thing they've got now is sharing a camera. We can actually take the setup and institute it right in the Zoom. And the cool thing about this is you get both what you're doing hands-on and you get your headshot up on the screen at the same time. And it's a very effective way of engaging, but using the rest of the tools, the cameras, the light box, the things that make the virtual presentation best, or the hands-on virtually, I think is really important. So that's one of the things that I want to get together as we start looking at how to do this, is how to make that easy and happen. So
it really forces the presenter to think about doing a real structured presentation, because he's got to almost like script it and even perhaps walk through it before, which is good.
yep.
And that's what I had on all those video presentations that you didn't see, is my little script off to the side, just so that you don't forget things when you're in the midst of doing the talking. I will tell you, from doing presentations both online and in person, I like the in person. I like the energy in the room. The problem with the online, a lot of times you just don't have the same energy and synergy.
It's a lot harder to, at least when I'm presenting, I always have a couple of ringers or people I know I can pick on, and that forces a little interactivity in the room, and it's harder to do that virtually. You're kind of watching the participants over in the corner and going, oh, let's see who's there that we can make an example of for this point. And that, that's a good technique in a live room. It brings people in. And that is much harder to do in a virtual environment. So, you have to adapt the style. Here's another random thought process to steal Phil's phrase. We might want to have a presenter training clinic at some point, talking about various presentation techniques, both virtual and live, and just make our people who have great ideas and great information a little more effective at sharing it.
Bill, should I add a item to our clinic list, which is how to clinic?
Yeah, absolutely, David. That would be an incredible contribution.
Speaking of clinics, who here attended my two presentations on soldering? Hey, now in that presentation, Phil, you were talking about having a second camera. I just had my iPad set up on a tripod looking down on where I was soldering, and I think the resolution of that image, so you guys could see what I was doing while I was soldering, was adequate. Would you folks who saw that think that was true?
I did.
Yeah. So the reason, by the way, just David, this YouTube or this Zoom channel is typically running at very much high HD. In fact, they actually turn it on to 1080. It'll run 1080 for us. If you run full screen on a big enough screen, it'll actually ask your system to transmit 1080. Zoom will not do that for virtually anybody unless you're a huge enterprise now. So all the Zoom stuff runs at 360. So what happens is when you do your iPad, Zoom's limiting it to 360, which is where when you use the second camera with that thing, because it's running as a share, it runs at high resolution because it's such a low frame rate. So yeah, the resolution was good, but we can actually make it better if we do it this way. But it does, again, it's and by the way, the camera I showed you is the equivalent of something you buy for $50 at Costco. It's the same as the Aver webcam at Costco, same kind of thing. But you're absolutely right, and I think it's very good, and we should do more of it. I just love somebody else who want to do a demo clinic and come do something. So we should. Anybody who wants to do a demo clinic, raise your hand and we'll set it up. Your latest project. So actually, I do have a share here. Joyce sent me something. And so let me share my screen here. So Joyce, why don't you tell us about your award here?
Well, I've been a master gardener for 24 years, and I thought it was relevant because my train layout is in the garden and it's a miniature garden. So gardening is a big part of my doing a authentic looking garden is a big part of what I try to do with the trains. And so this is the highest award that they offer. And it's for 2,500 hours of volunteer service to the community through the Master Gardener program. I've worked with the farmers markets in Pinole and in Martinez and in Richmond and in Kensington, and giving out free advice to people. And I've also been working with a program with handicapped people who want to do gardening and want to be able to do gardening in an adaptive manner. So I worked really hard for this, so I wanted to share it.
Congratulations. That was well earned and well deserved.
Thank you.
Although, Joyce, I do have to say that really must cut into your model railroading time, all that gardening.
Yes, it does. It does.
Well, I guess that's the question with garden railroading is, are you a gardener who railroads or a railroader who gardens to support your railroad? So interesting, probably always an interesting question for a garden railroader.
It is a difficult thing to balance. The hardest part I find is taking everything down at the end of summer. And then because it takes weeks of full-time work, I have just dozens and dozens of little buildings and people and scenes, and it's just a lot of work. So finding a time to do 2,500 hours of Master Gardener work was not easy, but I'm glad I did it. It was fun, and they're nice people. So
cool.
Thank you. And
Thank
Dave
you.
Connery's wife has been a Master Gardener for a long time also. She has even more hours than I do. But this particular certificate is the highest award that they give officially. So they gave her another kind of big party, which she well deserved.
Bill, towards your question of determining whether it's a gardener with a railroad or a railroader with a garden, you simply have to ask Seth how much the particular person is consulting the operations SIG to put more and more operations in their garden railroad. Then you know they're a railroader that gardens.
Yeah. Well, there's two of us that work on it. And my friend Bill, he does most of he knows computers and all of that stuff. So he does the mechanical and I do the scenes and the layout.
Well, that's cool. Well, I think we're all looking forward to coming and visiting you in the spring.
I hope you will.
When it's
all that work, if it sits there all summer and nobody sees it, it's discouraging. So I do hope you'll come. My email, you all have my email and phone number, right?
Well, when you get a little closer, we'll just announce it on here, Joyce, when you are, if you're comfortable with that for this group, and we'll do it and turn off the recording so it's not in the recording. I don't want information like that
that's a good point.
Personal information I don't want to leave in a recording on YouTube. That's the only thing that concerns me. So
yes.
Malik makes a suggestion that brings to mind is turning a visit to Joyce's layout, the gang going over, is to get the mini cam in the flat car as Al recommends, and then turn that into part of a virtual attendance to Joyce's layout for folks that can't make it.
I would love that. But I also have my 5-minute video of my layout on my band's website, and that is at freshpickedband.com, and it's free. It's a 5-minute video. You go to my band's website and you click on trains, and you can see my 5-minute, and it was done professionally by the Garden Railways magazine. So
The
if,
fun video.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. But you're all welcome to visit that and ask me any questions you have. But it'd
I'll
be fun
throw.
to do it again.
So speaking of cab ride videos, I'll throw a link in. There's a link that's a YouTube video that was one of, if you remember, if you've ever been to train shows and saw the California Central Coast ON30, Joe, who built like if you remember the sawmill module, that was the one that came in second at the NMRA, and that, he had some health issues about 5 years ago, and decided he couldn't come to shows anymore. So he set all of his modules up in his garage and built two big in-loop modules. One, I guess, I assume you can call something that can be moved physically a module, even though it's like 8 by 8. So and probably weighs 200 pounds, but it has mountains that are 4 foot high. But that's a cab ride video we did. We had a little get together down at his shop, and so you might see that. It's pretty cool. One of the layouts, I at some point would love to have it be open, and maybe if we do something in September, I can convince him to have his layout open. So he also has a man cave that I have to say I am incredibly envious of. You can kind of see it in the video as it drives around, but Bob's been there. It's quite frankly the most impressive man cave I've actually physically been in. But my man caves are fairly low, my count thereof. So
He's single and your house is a whole man cave.
Joe is married to a good woman.
Yes. Yep.
So you don't have to be single. It's even better to have a good woman.
Well, you can tell that you made two good choices in life. Choice one is you married correctly, and two is you moved to Morgan Hill, where you can have 1.5 acres of land and it's flat. And I think those are two considerations for a model railroader. That's something we should train young model railroaders in is spousal approval. And you notice that's not gender based in any way. That's just general. Spousal approval and physical space location are important in your consideration of your life choices.
I noticed that on the website or on the groups.io that there was somebody in the San Luis Obispo area that had an enormous O-scale building that he was trying to get help to finish this layout. And I'm thinking, my God, I put up with 11 by 2.5.
Yeah, it was interesting. Someone was showing. I remember where it was in Canada. I think it was on that event on last week, and somebody built a huge building, like 10,000, 20, 15,000 square feet.
Whoa.
And they have like 3 or 4 clubs in it. Each one has 4,000 or 5,000 square feet to build layouts in a museum up in Canada somewhere. I got to go find more information. It was pretty amazing. I had a picture of the building, and it was a huge building with multiple scales and layouts in it. So that's what we need. The thing that we need somebody like Elon Musk to be a closet model railroader and build a model railroad structure and invite clubs and people to come in and create. I mean, if we had a building like that somewhere, it could be brilliant. And we got enough people like that in the Valley. Why can't we find that one model railroader who hit it big on a startup?
Bill Decker, before he moved back up to Oregon, Bill Decker was involved in a proposal to get some of Hangar 1 at Moffett Field for exactly that purpose. And they had a proposal for, among other things, a minimally compressed model of the coastline from somewhere around Burbank Junction to the Bay Area. But just one thing or another, it never quite came together and they didn't get the space allocation, but it would have been very cool had they done it.
Well, yeah, there may be more space available now with all the work at home.
Well, wouldn't that be cool? I mean, I keep thinking, we have all these problems building enough housing, and it's just clear, given all the difficulties, we'll never build our way out of the mess, and it's time to really just say no more new jobs in the Bay Area until it gets into some kind of equilibrium. And that might release some office space for our purposes. Certainly retail malls, they've been devastated and are clearly never coming back. A lot of it will get converted to housing, although the cities will, fight losing the sales tax revenue. Of course, we being a nonprofit wouldn't generate any either, but there should be some space.
Here's the interesting thought process on that. One of the impacts of Prop 13 is that no commercial building is ever taxed as a building. Every commercial property is an LLC. And by the way, if you notice, all the wealthy people are buying their homes as LLCs now. So you create an LLC, the LLC buys a property, and the LLC leases the property to you. And the reason is you never sell the property, you sell the LLC. And because you didn't sell the property doesn't get reappraised and Prop 13 doesn't kick in. So if you got a mall in your town that was built 30 years ago, the property taxes they're paying is based on the value of the mall 30 years ago. If you pull that mall out and build houses there, the property tax value of those houses is based on today. And I almost guarantee you'll get more money. Plus the property taxes go to the city, the sales taxes go to the state. So, it's really interesting to think about. The only thing that stays locally in the sales tax is the overage. So
yeah,
it
but
probably
still, that's significant.
But if you look at the volume, it's probably might even be financially more viable for a community to replace a mall with houses for the property tax revenue versus the sales tax revenue. That's an interesting thought. But the other thing that's happening.
Tax, can I put myself in queue for showing some stuff after the tax discussion?
Right now, no, we'll kill it.
We'll stop rambling.
So by the way, the one comment, who's buying malls? Amazon. Amazon is buying malls in major cities because they're located centrally and they're great to build distribution centers on. And so they're buying them for the land to build a distribution center. So it's actually interesting. Amazon is replacing malls from being a physical to being a virtual distribution center. So very kind of interesting. Anyway, go to you, David.
Okay, share screen. The thing here is that I mentioned I appreciated Seth making for all the work he might have done to put together the SIG thing. And the SIG presentation, my big interest was in future layout, what my lady and I call future layout to go in future home. But I recently bought another copy of Multi-Deck Design for Model Railroads by Tony Kester. And I want to build a multi-deck railroad. And this is, let's see if this works. Do you see a sketch, folks, showing a railroad?
Yeah.
Yes, it's sharing.
It is sharing. And what I have been going, well, during the SIG presentation, I talked to some people, and reading Kester's book, there's some people hate helixes. Some people love helixes. Some people shrug their shoulders and say, it goes back and forth. This is a theoretical railroad with a bunch of my givens and druthers embedded in it. But what I'm interested in is people's thought on that upper left corner where another scenic feature I picked up out of, I think it was Armstrong's Track Planning for Realistic Operation, which I read so often it fell apart and had to buy a second copy, along with Track Planning for Realistic Operation and Creative Track Planning and Track Planning for Operation by Chubb. I've done a lot of reading. I've been involved in the construction of some fairly complex railroads and run on club railroads here and there. So I have some background. This isn't like I'm new to the hobby and going, gee, should I have a helix? But what I'm playing with here is killing a whole bunch of real estate by jamming the helix and staging into one corner of the room, with the main line being a huge radius for scenic effect, but then having a scenic block. You see the little row of dots, like it's a set of bluffs or something. The railroad's running along with the river and at the edge of the benchwork. But combining staging and the helix, where this is showing through staging, where you come off the main line coming up along the left wall of the building and then come off the main and come into a double-ended staging, which then goes around and comes back to the main and the other side of the room. And then the helix sitting above it, where you climb a bit up to the helix, climb up, and then come out at the upper level. And then the same thing of upper level staging overlaying the helix on a through arrangement. This, of course, can also be changed to setting it up where you have return loop staging. So you would have more of where you'd have a return loop on the lower level going one way, and then stacked above it going the other way in the upper level, a return loop. So you could run, say, loop to loop, upper loop all around down the helix, around the lower section and into the loop at the other end for loop to loop. But any people have any thoughts that they have for wasting or spending this kind of floor space on staging and a loop? I'd appreciate any comments or thoughts.
I just have one comment about that upper left-hand corner. That it seems like it's very busy,
Yes.
and that you could get bogged down in the construction of that corner and never really get anywhere else.
It is a big construction job, and that is one constant in people talking about the problems of helixes is it's a stinker to build.
I mean, it depends on how quickly you want to build, or not get operating.
So, I think the other thing, David, is to think about what you're modeling, because I think helixes work and are almost mandatory if you're modeling flat land. It's very hard to get between levels if you're modeling a model that's a flat land model. If you're modeling a mountain model, then you could take that corner and create something where you actually got the elevation change and had a scene that accommodated the, a 20-inch elevation change. You go through the math, but if you make that in a scene where you go through it and you rise the elevation, it's your climb area, and then it becomes an area where maybe you have to add helper engines on and it's much more visible. So I think one of the thought, and by comments by anyone, my thought would be, we'll use a helix knob, maybe more of a reflection of the railroads you model versus the kind of a physical design thought process, because modeling a mountain railroad allows you to do level transitions without a helix, where if you're modeling Iowa, it's pretty hard to model a 3% grade in Iowa realistically.
Right.
Seth, by the way, you know much more about this than I do, but that would be kind of my thought process.
Well, I think David just popped up the what I think is probably the preferred solution if you can have visible grades, which is the Nolix. He's showing a 30 by 40 foot space, I think, and there's plenty of room at 1 inch and 48 comes out to it's roughly 2.2% actually, which is kind of a maximum mainline grade. So if you do that by running around the walls, then the visual transition is believable, and you avoid all the hidden trackage and frankly the extra great big blob. So that's why it's become probably the more conventional approach lately.
I think I'm now sharing a drawing of a Nolix.
Yeah.
And this would fit in the same space. The space, by the way, is about 24 by 40. This is theoretical. My management is happy to consider my building an outbuilding or extending a garage to get this kind of floor space, or if a miracle happens and I'm in a house with a basement. But in the Nolix, for me, what I realized is as I drew that Nolix is that now what you end up doing or it seems to me that you're modeling a mountain district where alpha is where there's a yard for the helpers and you run up to the top of the hill at hotel siding where there's a yard where the helpers get cut off. But I don't know if I didn't have it in mind to model a mountain district, where you have this constant climb. Notice that the sidings are level, by the way. I have enough run in this theoretical railroad at about 215 foot of mainline run on a level to do this kind of climb and have reasonable grades. But I don't know. I just don't. Yeah, I think about it and it doesn't call out to me as much as having um, a more level, have two different level decks that are more level. Maybe they've got some grades in them, but not this big steady ruling grade all the way across. But that's more of a gut reaction.
Well,
Anybody?
I think you're onto it, and you've obviously done, read all the good references on it. I think I would just think of the, total run versus rise as a budget, and where do you want to spend your grade budget, realizing that at no point do you want more than about 2.5%, and you'd probably like that to be accessible. In other words, don't have your ruling grade be hidden somewhere because you're just asking for a lot of annoying problems. So, it may be that you can have steeper areas and much longer, flatter areas. It's 25 by 40. So you've got something to work with.
Yeah.
Hey, Dave, I don't think you've seen it. It's long since torn down, but Bob Osborne had a garage layout, and it was a Nolix like that running around the room, and it was very successful. We had numerous op sessions there. The track was all accessible. You could watch trains run. After running on layouts with hidden track, it's always kind of a maintenance issue, how you get in and work on that. The other question I have for you is, how do you get into the layout space? It looks like it's all duck unders.
Yeah, there would have to be some lift. Probably the lower level would be a swing away gate, and then the upper level would be a nod under.
Okay. The other observation is you don't have much aisle space.
3
There's
foot.
lots of pinch points in there. And,
The
if you've
aisle
been
is
to David Parks and you get a few operators, it gets really tight, especially for people in that middle area.
3 foot is what I have it gets no tighter than 3 foot anyway on this. And
Okay.
reading more in Kester's book and some of the comments as it may be that the depth of seam that I have in some places that is 2 foot deep could be brought down to 18 inches to pick up some more aisle space. I do recognize the problems with that.
So David, doing something similar for a space I have, one of the things I've been doing is doing it on the computer, but putting in a person wherever there would be an operation location, and then using that to make sure that at that location where you've got operators, you're not basically having a narrower area for people to get around. So in other words, kind of the thought process might be have narrower areas where there are passages where people are not working, larger areas where working. And then the other thing I think that becomes interesting is you can align the work areas on the upper and lower levels so they're slightly out of position. So somebody working on the upper level is physically. So I think there's some things you can do with really, instead of doing a uniform aisle length, think about the aisle width varying based on the activities that are happening in that physical location on the two levels.
Right.
And it may make it a lot more, I mean, it takes some thought process, but it's, maybe a lot better way to do it. So,
right.
Yeah, that's absolutely valid. I'm just looking, you have a little spur here at the end of the turnaround blob at the end of the Armstrong spiral. Maybe cut that back a little bit. You're sure to accumulate people down there right about the 15-foot mark at about 5
right
in the lower right. Phil's absolutely correct. You offset the working areas, and you can manage that somewhat with operational scheduling so that the two locals working those towns aren't expected to be out at the same time.
Right.
Modulate the aisle width or the shelf width. Bill Darnaby's written about that. So, some good ideas there.
Yeah, well, given that the main yard, which is a given for me, has ladders on each end where somebody would be working, probably have two crews working, one at each end of that
Sure.
large yard, and the blob where I put rail fan area up at the top there would be that gives room for the crew working the upper end of the yard and getting rid of that little set of tracks sticking down below the blob down at the other end of the yard would make more room for people to get by, operators working that end of the yard. But yeah, narrowing the aisles certainly. But yeah, I take the comments on the constructional difficulty of the helix. I think for me, what I'm hoping to do is in this coming year is once we start getting out and doing layout tours and stuff is to visit and operate on layouts that have helixes. The guys down in Crockett and the different layouts around the barrier where there are helixes, and talk to them and run them and get a feeling. So that's some of the stuff I have in mind. Oh, I should remark that this layout is not crammed with a lot of towns and stuff. I'm figuring 30 feet between each siding. Siding's 15-foot long. I like longer trains. So it's not like, how shall I put it, traditional model railroad where you go 3 or 4 feet and you're into the next town. So there will be some room and indeed that if there's two sidings, upper and lower level, one of them might be just an empty siding without a lot of switching, so that indeed you don't get two crews fighting over the same space to do their work. Okay, it sounds like I've gotten some great comments on that. I will drop screen sharing and pass the ball to the next person.
You talked about the cost of a helix and the difficulty of building it. So that's a $400 helix kit.
Well, Phil, if I'm building a layout the size of that theoretical, this is going to be the least of my expenses.
But what I'm saying is, so this is an interesting thought. If you think about the cost of building a helix and doing it yourself in terms of labor and material versus that of buying it, assemble it for $400 from something that's already cut, it may be, the difference of the $200 may be one of the best $200 you spend. It's interesting when you build a big layout. I think that might be an interesting clinic, Seth, and to think about is trading time for money in building a large layout. In other words, where are the good places to think about making the decision of trading money for time when you build a large layout? Because I'm assuming that's something that becomes a consideration.
And that trade-off looks awful good if I had the space. Believe me.
I think you could probably build the helix 2 or 3 times to get it right. Because things like that, if I was doing it, nothing I do ever is perfect the first time. And I usually do everything I do 2 or 3 times before it's acceptable. And once I get it right, it's good from then on. So I would think that if you were doing a helix, you could easily put in weeks of work into the helix. Then you have to ask yourself, do you want to be paid $5 an hour? And your time's worth it doing other better things, unless you love carpentry.
Yeah.
If you love carpentry, it's for you, and you should build them for other people.
Well, and when you build a layout in a 24 by 40 foot room, you need to love carpentry because you're going to get to do quite a bit just to do the basic bench work. So anyway, it's interesting, helixes are so hard to build, but it's clear that somebody came up with the idea of turning it into a little business. So
More power to them. I hope they succeed in selling enough units to make some money at it.
yep.
Well, I think in a model railroad business, the object is to not lose too much money.
Yeah. The whole thing about how to make a large fortune small.
Yes, exactly.
I thought that was a winery.
Any of these things.
I think there are a lot of retirement hobby businesses.
Yes. Where the business is a hobby as well as
Right. The goal of the business is not to provide an income, but to pay for itself and have enjoyment of the hobby. My wife has that kind of a business with her nose work that she does. It's, you know, it's not generating income, but it's paying for all of her hobby activities. So
The other thing too is to consider if your business is really contributing to other hobbyists and making things easier for them.
absolutely.
Well, I have nothing other than to show you what I've been spending my time on. This structure is the sand house at Port Costa, and I've been working on it now for almost 2 years. And I pulled it off the layout and finally decided to replace the dummy cardboard roof with something a little bit more closer to prototype. And then also having to start working on where the sand pipes are going to go. For instance, this fed both a the lead to the turntable, which ran right in front of it, and it also fed a ready track where you can see on my layout there's a line of engines that were steaming. And anyway, it's just something that's interesting. It isn't. I've got to get that roof to stay down properly without gluing it, but it's where I spend my time.
Cool.
Oh, and by the way, that's the 1080p camera, but you're saying it's only transmitting at 360 when we're looking at it on Zoom?
Hang on, let me see what it is. Well, this one, remember this, like I said, this channel is not normal because it's got HD turned on. Hang on, let me go in, I can see.
Well, Phil's banging on that. The thing is, if you're just doing talking heads in a conference, you don't need super high resolution.
Right.
When you're trying to show the fine details of filing points on a N-scale turnout you're building, you need that resolution and that bandwidth.
You do need the HD.
So yeah, actually right now you're sending at 720. But that's
Okay.
again because this channel has the HD 720 turned on.
720 is acceptable.
Yeah, no, it's not unreasonable. And again, it's more the idea of if you're doing something really detailed up close. So,
Yeah.
I mean, even 360 is not too bad if it's progressive. I mean, compared to some of the older web cameras, which Bob and I are familiar with.
I can't handle much more on my DSL line. It only gets about a 500 megabit rate.
That was an
Next.
old digital camera we worked on back in the.
Huh?
That was an old digital camera we worked at on the
Yeah.
90s.
Yeah.
it was really, it was really a piece of work.
Yeah. Does that still work, Jim?
No. Yeah, copy Windows 95 or 98 to run it on?
No.
I have to say this. It's dead, Jim.
Yeah, along with my CPM computer in the basement.
Ooh.
You know, this like some of these leading edge technology deals you do, and it's kind of like the talking dog. It's not that it speaks well, it's that it speaks at all.
Yeah. Or as the old thing went with the dog, speak, speak, speak. And finally the dog looked up at him and said, but what should I say?
Yeah. Hey, I'd like to show what I'm working on my control panel.
Go for it.
Okay, so I thought about making a control panel starting by taking a photograph of the top of my module and then trimming that with an X-Acto knife and then laying that down on the panel. But that doesn't work for a couple of reasons. And so I moved on. I started with my track plan for the module, which you'll note has photocopy or reduced sized images of actual Pico switches. And so I use this to do a quarter scale model of my two modules. So I thought, hey, that actually doesn't look that bad. If I tried doing that better, maybe that would work. So I took my layout drawing, photocopied it so that it fit full scale on 2 pieces of paper, because my control panel is 22 inches wide. So that's about 2.5 by 11 sheets of paper. I then went into PowerPoint and I took photographs of the switches and some flex track, and then scaled them so that they were the right size for the layout. So the control panel is 22 inches long and the layout's 144 inches long for the two modules together. So I took a bunch of small straight segments and made a 20-inch curve, which I decided would be the size of the curve on the control panel. The real curves are a little bigger. And then I basically pasted them together in PowerPoint to make the track plan for my layout. And then put that on a piece of painted metal. So I got it laid out on the right side. The left side, I haven't done the track yet, and I'll get to that when I get to that. And so I actually ended up moving everything up into my garage, which is actually a major accomplishment and a little story of itself. And you can see that my road bed can be removed from my module for service. So I'm actually about to wire up the control panel into the module, and it's a lot easier to do with it lifted up because it's really easy. There's a light right next to it so I can see everything. And this is more what it looks like when it's the control panels hooked up to the layout and the track. So that's my concept for control panels. I was going to do masked lines with tape, but I decided that when I looked at my original module plan, which I did at the very beginning, I decided that looked pretty cool and that I was going to do control panels using that, since I have a fairly large control panel. So, and then as noted, I got input from everybody before, I decided not to use any NCE specific command structure for driving the switches. The switches are just driven directly off of decoders on the rail, so it'll work no matter whose system I'm set up with. So anyway, that's what I've been working on.
Cool. I'm going to share real quickly what I'm working on, then I'm going to throw it to David because I actually have to run, but let me share screen 2 there. So can you guys see that?
Wow.
So this is actually, if you come to the convention, I'm going to redo the clinic I did on this building. So this is a 3D printed framed building with wood siding. But you notice the roof is not finished. So that's my goal, to try to get that done. So I've got it all dry brushed now, so it looks like wood. It's kind of a technique of finishing the wood off. And then I needed siding. So I bought the Northeastern. Northeastern sells this corrugated and a more of a metal, more modern, a little bit different metal roof siding in 3x8 sheets, 5 of them for $10. I found if you notice up here on the left, I found it's really easy if you line up a cutting edge. This is that micro mark short cutting edge, and use a square to come over the right distance and find the point to cut. You can cut those. So this is a load of siding. Basically, that is enough siding to finish the building. And this is all the siding laid off with the first coat of paint. I'm not trying to do something that's decrepit. I'm trying to do something that's working, late teens, early 20s, working building, well maintained, reasonably well maintained. So it's going to have rust, but I didn't want to do the corrugations where there are holes in it or anything. And then the other project I'm doing, which I was unsuccessful the first time, is I'm trying to resin cast sacks. So I got some Grant Line sacks and built this really cool mold thing out of hot glued acrylic. Unfortunately, the first time I tried to do a silicon mold, it didn't cure properly at the bottom. So I either didn't mix it right or I had an issue with it. So I got to try it again. It was the Tap Plastics good stuff. So I'm assuming I blew it in my mixing, but I am trying to get some modeling done.
Somebody say the first and second time we do things, it isn't quite right.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, and I got to tell you, there's nothing worse than you reach out there and you pull that silicon and you pull it out, and then all of a sudden you see this gooey, sticky stuff at the bottom. And it's like, oh, and then you got to kind of dig it all out there and try to wash it all out and get the mold, get the base mold so you can redo it with the silicon. Yeah, I was almost as depressed as I've been at least as depressed as I've been in 2022. That was probably my most depressing moment yet so far in 2022.
The Tap Plastics material to make that silicon isn't cheap, is it?
It's $42 for the 2 little jars, and I used probably 15-20% of the jars on that first pour. So yeah, it was an $8 waste of time, money, and effort. Like I said, it was very depressing. So that's the other thing, guys. I always think we ought to do is we all got to admit our failures, because you don't get where you get without having some failures. And I think sometimes people come into this hobby and see stuff that people make, and they're just amazed by it, and they don't realize that it took you 4 tries to get there. The first 3 tries didn't get close to where you thought you were getting to. But anyway,
just raised her hand.
Yeah. Do you know about Russ Miller he's the director of the Tap Plastics. I think it's Hayward or San Leandro, and he's a member of Baggers, Bay Area Garden Railway Society. In fact, he's the president. And he's very active with Tap Plastics. He's the director of the whole office there. I can look that up.
Well, if you know him in that, it would be great to talk. It would be great to have him, ask him if he'd be interested in coming and doing a clinic.
He does clinics.
If you do it at one of our, that would be, that's actually, Joyce, you just came up with a really interesting thought process. We only ask our modelers to do clinics. Maybe we should ask, Tap Plastics is kind of an interesting vendor. Maybe we should look at some of those people to come in and ask them to do some clinics for us. Because he probably knows more than any. That's a great idea. Yeah, if you know him, can you contact him and see if maybe we can have him set up to do that? Because a clinic, Tap does a couple of things. There are a couple of things that I'm sure they do that would be good for us to learn. So that's great.
He's a railroader, and he has a layout, and he knows everything there is to know about how to use every different type of glue and how to do the plastics. Unfortunately, he's very busy because he's the president of the Baggers, Bay Area Garden Railway, and he also is the director of this store, Tap Plastics store. But he knows everything there is to know about tap plastics, and I'd be happy to contact him. You know, I wonder if we should share newsletters between, Baggers shares newsletters with other train groups, usually with Garden Railroad groups, but there's an overlap with regular NMRA stuff. So I wonder if that might be possible to arrange.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, because Bob is doing the new layout for the for our newsletter, and we need to get everybody's input into it, because love to get a newsletter out here in March. So we've been a little bit derelict on that. And for folks who come to these events, it's probably not a big deal not to get a newsletter, because quite frankly, if you come to these, you're probably more informed than you'd ever be reading a newsletter. But for the majority of our members that don't come to these, I think a newsletter is really important. I have to apologize. I'm actually late. I was supposed to run. I'm going to hand this off to David, and he's going to take over for here. And I will see you all in a couple of weeks. Bye now.
These threats don't frighten us, Phil.